Welcome. This is Signal. Vicky Velasco and the Blood Murders, written by Patton and ThisIsSignal. Intro music and soundscape by Patton. Narration by ThisIsSignal. The smell of death arising from her corpse called out to the blowfly. It came to her through the chill autumn night, entering by the back door of the small, ivy-colored house. The fly found her twisted, broken body on the soft, ornate carpet of her little home office. The fly worked its way across the inside of her dry mouth and laid its eggs between Dr. Helena March's teeth and tongue. Somewhere deep in the dark home, a phone rang again. Soon, more flies came, tucking their eggs into her ears, nose, and eyes. And still later, after the police had made their welfare check, after the yellow tape had gone up, after the neighbors had huddled together in the heavy mist that blurred the bright blue and red lights of the 4 Vancouver PD cruisers, Detective Vicky Velasco knelt by the dead woman's body. She watched the blowflies now. A deep chill went up her spine because, as in the last case, it was not what the flies were doing that bothered her. It was what they were not doing. A voice pulled her from her concentration. "Detective Velasco," said Officer Sean Park, his face ashen. "The coroner's preliminary report confirms it. Cause of death, exsanguination." "Fuck," she whispered under her breath as she stood, stretching. A week ago, the victim had been a young historian named Mark LeBlanc. He had been found dead in his small ghetto apartment on the Vancouver downtown east side. His body similarly drained of blood. And, like Dr. Helena March, he had 2 puncture wounds in his neck. Deep open holes that the autopsy revealed had punctured his carotid artery. He must have bled like a garden hose, and yet there's almost no blood on the floor, furniture, or walls, thought Velasco. And then there were the blowflies. She watched the insects again as they lit on the woman's face, her hands, crawling up her skirt. Every orifice examined and re-examined. Thousands of eggs laid, except in the wounds of the victims' necks. Why? It was unnatural. She pushed that needling thought to the back of her mind and looked out the dead woman's window. This was going to be bad. The neighborhood was wealthy and tight-knit. Other than a small blurb in a local paper, the media had virtually ignored the death of Mark LeBlanc. Just another tragic ghetto death, and probably was drug or gang-related. Though the young man had no history of drugs or gang contact, it was his postal code that had condemned him in the media. But Dr. Marsh was a woman of means, a pillar of her wealthy Kitsilano community, and an acquaintance of the mayor. "Fuck," Vicky whispered under her breath again. She looked at her watch. 3 a.m. All right, she thought. I can still get some work done here. As she began to scan the room, taking in the artifacts and the books that cluttered every surface, a tome lay open on the desk, its title in Gothic script, Legends of the Nosferatu. "No blood anywhere in the room?" Vicky asked, her voice steady. She already knew the answer. Sean shook his head. "Not a drop. Marc LeBlanc, too, had been studying folklore, specifically the connections between Slavic and Western European myths. The parallels were compelling. "Who called it in?" Vicky asked. "Her assistant, Maya Torres. She said Dr. Marsh missed a scheduled lecture and wasn't answering her phone. She called in a welfare check. The 2 uniforms out front entered the premises through the back door that was left ajar and found her body." Vicky nodded. "Get Maya's statement. I'll need to talk to her later." As the forensics team worked, Vicky's gaze returned to the open book. She read a passage to herself. The Nosferatu, or vampire, is said to drain the life of its victims, leaving them pale and cold. Legends speak of their aversion to sunlight, silver, and sacred objects. Had the killer or killers left this book open? Maybe some weird vampire cult looking to make the news or leaving a red herring for her? They are said to be immortal unless pierced in the heart with wood. And there was that feeling again, her spine tingling, as a thought came into her mind, unbidden. By the prickling of my thumbs, something wicked this way comes. The coroner had found the lack of blowfly eggs in the wounds as strange as Vicky had. But after testing the wounds, could find no traces of any substance to explain the anomaly. This left Vicky with the only other connection she was able to find between Dr. March and Marc LeBlanc, their common research. Both had been investigating the origins of vampire myths, tracing them back to medieval Europe. Dr. Marsh's notes were handwritten and meticulous, detailing accounts of villagers who had claimed to encounter the undead, which was why the name of Father Mateo, scrawled out hurriedly in the margin of the doctor's final notes, grabbed Vicky's attention. Her phone call to the retired priest seemed not to faze him at all, as if he had been expecting someone to contact him. They agreed to and met later in the evening at an old, quiet church, its high Gothic revival ceiling carrying their soft voices through the incense-filled cloister. "Father Mateo, did you know either Dr. Helena Marsh or Mr. Marc LeBlanc?" Vicky began, opening her notebook and carefully watching the face and the body movements of the old priest. He remained still, relaxed, and focused on her. "No, detective. Though I have heard of them, we are a small community." "Community?" Vicky interrupted. "Yes, I am a folklorist. The focus of my study has been primarily in the undead demons and the like. I have worked with the police in the past as an unofficial consultant." "I see," said Vicky, momentarily surprised. "And then, who did you work with?" "Can't say." "Okay. Can you tell me what case?" "No," the old priest said in a tone that suggested the subject was closed. Vicky leaned back in the pew and sighed. She stared into the impassive face of the old priest and waited. He in turn stared back at her and also waited. Vicky was the first to break the silence, her voice hard. "Father Mateo, I did you a courtesy by meeting you here. It is well within my power to move this meeting to the department. You believe one of the undead is responsible?" Father Mateo interrupted, his voice calm but probing. Vicky's mind clicked, and she thought, this crazy old man knows something. I can feel it in my bones. Carefully, she replied, "Do you know something about my cases?" "Only what I've gleaned from the headlines." "I see." Vicky again probed the man's face. but he again revealed nothing. He was following the case. He claimed to be a consultant in the past for the VPD. For the first time, Vicky had finally found a person of interest, and she was delighted. Carefully, she replied, "I don't know what to think. Perhaps you have a theory." Father Mateo nodded slowly. "Vampire legends have persisted for centuries. While I don't believe in literal vampires, there are those who adopt their persona, cultists, deranged individuals who believe they can achieve immortality through blood." This was nothing new. The idea of this being cult-related was all over the media. The question was this old man involved, and what did he know? However, before she could pursue this train of thought, the old man leaned in and whispered, "But if such a creature exists, you must remember they are predators. They thrive on fear and secrecy, but they're not invulnerable. Wooden stakes, sunlight, and holy water are said to harm them, even kill them." In the end, Vicky left the church with more questions than answers, but she couldn't dismiss the priest's words or her suspicions of him. Crazy or not, that old man knew something. And then there were those little blowflies, crawling everywhere but the wounds in the victims' necks. The bites. As Vicky headed back to the police station, word came that Maya Torres, Dr. March's assistant, had disappeared. Witnesses from her apartment building claimed to have heard a loud fight and then witnessed her leaving in a strange, almost drugged state, and accompanied by a tall, pale man in a dark coat. His features were sharp, his complexion very pale, and his movements eerily fluid and cat-like. Vicky's instincts screamed that he was connected to the murders. Cruisers had been dispatched to Miss Torres' apartment, and a missing persons alert issued. But the tall, pale man and Miss Torres had disappeared into the night. At 3 a.m., Vicky was back at the station, carefully going through Dr. March's notes, and after that, legends of Nosferatu, in the hopes of uncovering some clue as to where Maya Torres had been taken, when Father Mateo ran into her office. "Detective Velasco." "Father Mateo, what are you doing here?" The priest looked like he had aged 10 years. And for the first time, she saw real emotion on his face. Fear. "I came right here when I heard of the girl going missing." Now Vicky was wide awake. "And how in the hell do you know about that?" asked Vicky. "I was told. I have certain sources. Please, detective, can you trust me just this once? We have to hurry." "What the? Sir, if you have information..." "No. Too much time has been lost already by May waiting for you in the lobby. Please, detective, follow me in your car. If I'm wrong..." "Wrong about what?" "If I'm wrong, there's nothing lost but a bit of sleep." Outside the precinct, the priest rushed to an old Ford Fairlane and got in. For a moment, Vicky was undecided about what to do. But when she heard the engine start and saw the lights come on, she jumped in Mateo's car. A half an hour later, they were parked outside an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The place reeked of decay, the windows boarded up to block out any hint of daylight. Inside, the air was heavy with an unnatural chill. Father Mateo sat beside her, his hands tight on the steering wheel. Urgency was radiating from every pore of the man's body. but Vicky was not about to be infected with it. What you're saying is that you were told by your contacts that a vampire, demon-infected vampire, said Mateo. A demon-infected vampire has our missing person, and he will feed on her before sleeping at dawn. And you can't tell me who these contacts are or how they came across this information. Oh yeah? Vicky said. What do you know? I know the bites will not decay. No fly will lay its eggs in the wounds. Vicky turned suddenly and faced the priest, stunned. The bite is from a rabid vampire. The lack of decay is the demon infection. Listen, detective. There is no time to waste. But before we go in, Mateo passed her a loaded Glock 17 magazine. These will be more effective. Vicky just looked at the clip, then smiled and nodded. The priest and Velasco got out of the old Ford Fairlane and walked into the rusted hulk of the old chemical warehouse. Mateo put his shoulder to the old door that had already splintered and pushed it open. They entered the dilapidated main room of the building. Vicky, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. She found Maya in a corner, unconscious but alive. Relief flooded her, but it was short-lived. From above, she heard a strange laugh. She pointed her flashlight into the gloom, expecting the voice to be coming from some sort of platform above. But what she saw caught her breath. It was a long, thin man skulking upside down along the rafters, his head twisted around, smiling at her like some kind of demented spider. Then he dropped and landed like a cat 20 feet away from Vicky and Mateo. His eyes glowed faintly red, and his smile revealed long, needle-like canines. Dr. Velasco, a voice drawled. You've been quite a nuisance. The man slowly stood up, watching the detective, bemused. Who are you? Vicky demanded, drawing her weapon. Call me Nikolai, he said, his tone amused. Dr. Marsh and her colleagues delved too deeply into truths best left buried. They looked where they should have not. They looked and stumbled across my secrets. And now you two fools have done the same. And you show up with a gun. Laughed the vampire. You're really out of your depth. We'll see about that, asshole, said Vicky, her grip firm and steady on her Glock 17. Once I've drained the little cow in the corridor, I'm going to drain that annoying priest, Mateo. And Nikolai smiled what was surely the smile from hell. Say your prayers, bitch, snarled Nikolai. And moving faster than any human possibly could, Nikolai attacked, but not before Vicky had discharged her weapon. The sound of 3 shots rang out. Nikolai was hit with such force that he was sent skittering and rolling across the room. His laughter turned into a piercing scream as he staggered back, smoke rising from his wounds. What have you done? He screeched, his voice crackling with pain. End of the line, bitch. And smiling, Velasco emptied the rest of the Glock 17's magazine into his chest and face. He collapsed, his body disintegrating into ash, leaving only silence in the cold, dark warehouse. Vicky lowered her weapon, her heart pounding. She looked at Father Mateo. He looked at her sadly, and she felt she understood why. "Things are never going to be the same, are they?" said Velasco. "No," said the priest. "They know about you now." The official report labeled Nikolai as a deranged killer with a penchant for theatrics. But Vicky knew the truth. As she stood on her balcony that evening, gazing at the city skyline, she couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows held more secrets than she ever imagined. For now, though, she'd face them one case at a time, with the ebony bullets that Father Mateo had given her. Vicky thought she was definitely going to make her business to find out a lot more about this enigmatic little priest and his friends. The end.